Habitat for Humanity of Washington County. And it's just something that keeps me active in the community, and it's something I believe in very strongly, so it's really a great thing for me to be doing.
If you don't mind me for asking, what made you first get involved with the Habitat for Humanity?
Through a friend of mine who is the executive director. A couple of years ago, 3 years ago or so, after I retired from the healthcare field, she approached me with the idea of helping them. They were just going through a merger with the Springdale chapter of Habitat, and they were merging to become Washington County, and she wondered if I would give them some help in helping them develop their market, so to speak.
Okay. Don, I was kind of interested. Can you give me a timeline of your professional / computer life, starting from when you were first interested in the field of computing, probably around where you got your formal education, starting around there?
My first contact with the computing field was in 1960. And I was doing some part-time work at Baptist Hospital in Little Rock, working in the business office while I was taking some classes at a business school to bring my accounting up to date. And they had a little card system at the hospital there. And the fellow who was the administrator of the hospital at that time approached me with the idea of working in the computer department. And it was all new to me. It sounded exciting, so I went in there and started working part-time. That quickly turned into full-time work. And was there about a year and a half when the guy who was the manager of the department moved on to other things, and they asked me if I'd take it over. So that's where I got started in computers.
Okay. And you had discussed to me online about the first hospital ordering system to be installed in the state of Arkansas. Can you briefly describe what that was, and if it's still being used today, and if not, how have they made changes to it?
Well, it's not being used today. Those were the early days, and systems have changed dramatically since then. And I have to say that I'm no longer really an expert in hospital systems design, which was really my forte, because I made a decision to move into hospital administration, so I didn't stay very much into the technical side of the computers after about 1980. But to answer your question, at the time that I went in the computer department, we had an old card system. It was a card processing system. It was an old IBM 402, they called it, which was a board wired system, which we used primarily for payroll, some of the ledger accounting type work. At that time, most of the ledger entries and so forth were still being made by hand by accountants. And they'd bring those ledgers in, and then we'd key those things in punch cards, and then we did the general ledger off the old 402 system, and also did the payroll. We moved from that into another card processing system that IBM had called a 36020, but it was actually the first real computer that we had ever experienced, because it in every way was a computer system. It still operated off card input. And that system would have filled this room up. And as I recall, we had 8K of memory. And that was a whole lot. I mean, we didn't know what we were going to do with all that 8K, because primarily most of the storage was still in the punch card. And we just use it more as a processor and linking the files together. We moved from that to a 36040, Model 40, which was still received a lot of input from punch cards, but with the 40 we were able to move on and go into using terminals within the computer department itself. We had terminals. And I think that system had 64K. And so that was really a big jump for us, and we really began processing other things within the hospital that up to that point it really wasn't feasible to do. And then when IBM developed the 370 series, that gave us the first capability to start thinking about putting terminals out at the work areas within the hospital itself, primarily the nursing stations and the service areas such as radiology and the laboratory and pharmacy and those areas. So we began to develop what was going to be called an online order system, and we worked with IBM. At that time, there really was not a software package available to us to be able to just bring it in and put it in and then put our own systems in, linking up with that. That wasn't available to us, so we worked with the IBM office in Little Rock and began to look at, I can't remember the number on the terminals that we brought in, but it was a touch screen concept. The first actual touch screen, as I recall, that anybody had developed was IBM. We brought those in and we began to structure all of our orders from our nursing stations through the system and then be able to print those orders out and at the various service areas while at the same time capturing the charge for that. And well, that was a big step. That was a big deal. In 1970, if memory serves me correct, it was either 1975 or 1976, when Baptist Medical Center built a new medical center out in West Little Rock. And my boss approached me with the idea that hospital was going to be one of the first in the country to be able to say that we were automated. So we actually left the computer system downtown at the old hospital and built what today would be called servers. They really weren't called servers in those days, but they were units out there that we could transmit, through the telephone lines and all that good stuff. And we opened that hospital with what we were told was the first hospital ordering system in the state. Somewhere out, I went through my files last night and I couldn't find it, but I'll find it eventually. IBM put out one of their sales brochures about the hospital information system that we had developed there. And it was a really exciting time. We opened that hospital and had all of our orders online, had all of our charges online. Online was a term that was a big deal in those days. It was long before the concept of databases, which is why it was so much more complicated, because everything had to be built through files. They had an indirect file or a direct file, and all the links and the go-tos and all the things that you had to have. That's what created such a massive problem for storage. And the 370 was actually, the 370 series, as I recall, was one of the first that used the new microchip that IBM developed. And it was just about that big in those days, and that was a huge step forward. Put in the new hospital that while we introduced the idea of nursing online order systems, in those days it was not even reasonable to consider the idea that they'd use a keyboard. The nursing staff there were so many of them that didn't even know how to type. And when we started talking about using keyboards, they just said no way, that it would never work. And so we were trying to introduce something that would be user-friendly, and so the idea of the touchscreen development came along, and that while it was cumbersome, it worked. And of course we'd have computer crashes and all those kinds of things in those days, and it'd be an all-night process trying to recover, but it was a fun time to be around.
Okay, so would it be correct for me to say that one of the biggest changes in ordering system has been the degree of user-friendliness because of the introduction of original databases and spreadsheets, it would be easier to track the information rather than look for it in actual memory.
Yes,
Yes.
no doubt about it. Memory searches and trying to keep up with all the registers was the programmers in those days, those guys were just, their brains were full of numbers, it was a real interesting deal. Well, just to answer your question, yeah, database is the biggest development that's come along, and the linkage to those databases. And of course, now, everybody uses computers for everything, so it's not a big thing to introduce a keyboard to a kid and let him be able to use it for anything. But then it was just not acceptable.
What kind of language did you build this with? Was it strictly an assembly language, or?
It was, it was a combination of stuff. My memory is fuzzy on all those, all those acronyms we used to use. But most of it was COBOL and Fortran, and the linkages for all that stuff, depending on what you were working on as to whether it would be COBOL or whether it be some of the hybrid systems that IBM had developed in those days.
And how have the systems that are being installed today, how have they changed in regards to these first ordering systems that you installed? But besides the fact of user friendliness, I'm pretty sure that they're using more powerful software languages with object-oriented programming. How would that affect the medical field and medical profession?
Oh, well, let me see if I can answer that question. Once again, I'm not an expert today. I've been away from the field of computing for about 10 years, and that's a lifetime in the development of computer. But we started this whole process of online order entry systems with the thought in mind that what our target was going to be was the automated medical record. And that was simply the first piece that was available to us, and the first thing that made any sense economically to be able to capture charges and to capture data that we could, because there were no databases, we could capture that data for files and have to reprocess it and enter it into a simplified medical record that we called in those days. But that development from 1970 or so up to, up until the late 90s, it really took that long to overcome all of the aspects of privacy, of the database development that came along so that you could actually capture all this data and begin to think about really building a simplified medical record or a medical record that was available in a database form. And then, of course, once those things were overcome as the technology developed and as the hardware developed and the microchips got smaller and smaller, and you were able to quit thinking about the idea of how much you were going to pay for the next 8K. You were able to start building all this information and capturing it. The next piece became, how do you use it? What do you do with all this data that you got captured? So today's technology allows you to capture, to get that data, get to that data through the databases in 100 forms. You can use a telephone, you can use a keyboard, you can use a PC, you can use just about anything and have that data accessible. So today the issues, in my estimation, are not so much technology as it is privacy of that data and how they maintain that privacy, yet make it available in the forms that are needed, the various forms that are needed for it to be useful to the patient, who is the end result of all that. So you notice I limit my conversations to hospital databases and health databases. That's all I ever did. So that's all I really know about.
Now let's take a step back away from the medical field. Let's just go into some general computing questions. What are some advancements in technology that kind of made you kind of go, wow, that's really, really amazing? What are some of those things that as the computers progressed and in size, I mean, as the computer field grew exponentially, what made you just kind of go, wow?
Well, I think the biggest step for me came when you were able to unwire it. In other words, go to the PC. When the PC development really came on, it just, I mean, it really changed everything in the direction that you could go and the accessibility that you had, and you weren't locked up to lines running. I mean, it's hard to imagine today the wiring that you had to do in order to have a remote system. We had a hospital that was 8 stories tall, and every room had to have hard wiring, you know, that big around running to it. So that all had to be planned during the development of the building. So to me, it's just amazing that now all you have to do is just have a series of interlinked PCs, and all those things are I mean, my telephone has more memory than the first computer I used.
That's actually very interesting.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have even thought about that.
Yeah.
How did it feel to be one of the original inductees of the Academy?
I was blown away. I mean, I was excited because I was going to get to see some guys I hadn't seen in a long time. Most of us that were in the first class that was brought in were, I mean, I knew a large portion of them because a lot of them worked for IBM in Little Rock, which was where I got most of my contact with the computing field in the early days. And it was just real good to see those guys again. I was really looking forward to it. And I didn't really think a great deal about it until the second class was brought in about a month ago. And as we sit and listen to the credentials of these guys who were being brought in, I was sitting there thinking, what the heck am I doing in here? I mean, these guys are, some of the things they have done in the last 10 years are just amazing. You know, what we did in the early days just seems so basic today. So I was honored to be brought in, and I was honored to be a part with the guys that I worked with in the early days.
Okay. Were you surprised with how much the modern PC has become a part of everyday life?
Yeah, even in my own world, even though I'm not involved in computing per se anymore. I use my computer for just about everything, you know, and my PC, and I mean the email and the communication ability of a PC is just incredible to me. Plus I keep all my, you know, all my personal records on there, and I keep all my checking accounts. I mean, it's just amazing what you can do, and I don't know what I would do without it today.
All right, now just, I've got some personal questions I'd like to ask you something about. If you could go back in time, type questions. If you had an idea to invent something or to create something, if money were not an issue, would you have done something? Would you have made an invention or tried to implement something that you wanted to do, and how would you have done that?
Well, I saw that question when you sent it to me, and you know, I never fancied myself to be an inventor of any kind. I fancied myself to, or thought of myself as a logical, a logician, if you will. That thinking things through when given a problem from beginning to end was what I liked to do. I never really sat down and thought much about what would I like to see out there in the future. But like in the early days of development of that hospital information system, you had to have some kind of forward thinking in order to know even what to ask for, you know. I had asked several times about the idea of push button or touch screen developments on the terminals, and I was excited to see when they came out with those things. So I don't really know how to answer that question. I don't think I'm smart enough to answer it.
All right. One technology that is progressing today, which one would you like to see more of in the future? Would you like to see like, RFID technology is, apparently it's one of the big deals in your supply chain IT nowadays.
Right.
Would that be something that you would want to see increase, decrease? I mean, around that, what fields of computing would you like to see more stuff being done with?
Well, you're probably not gonna like to answer that question, but I think my concerns today are not so much the development of the technology or what I'd like to see developed in the technology. I would like to see more work done in the utilization of that technology and being sure again that we cover the privacy issues. RFID technology is something that has just exploded. It's come on the scene. It's available in just about any area of expertise that you work in, as long as there's a supply and demand type thing, as long as there's a supply chain in there somewhere. But it even drifts over into the hospital field. I mean, we're already implanting RFID technology in animals. You put one in your pets, and keep the pet's records on that chip. That technology is available to humans, as we know, and it's being used in some limited cases. But I would just like to see more thought and more concern given to utilization of the technology that's currently there before we move too quickly in starting implanting things like RFID chips everywhere.
Okay. Well, it looks like I've covered all the questions that I had for you. I'd like to thank you very much for giving us the time to interview you today.
No problem. I appreciate you asking.
All right. Thank you very much.